All right, so we did factoring with GCF. Now we're going to do different factorings where we're dealing with trinomials and you actually have your x squareds. The first thing we have to talk about is the actual standard form of a quadratic. And so if you look here, I've written it out. You have ax squared plus bx plus c. And we're going to talk a lot about this a, b, and c. All those are our numbers, so they will not be any letters. So your first step when we're factoring these trinomials is to multiply a and c. So whatever number a is and whatever number c is, you're going to multiply those two together. You're then going to list out the factors of that new number ac. So any number that divides into there, you're going to list it out. Then you're going to figure out which factor pair adds or subtracts to get b, that middle number. And then once you have that, you're going to take both of those factors, you're going to divide it by that original a value, and you're going to simplify the fraction. Now, the fifth step is how we write it, and we use those fractions that we just did. So what you're going to do is you're going to take the denominator number, so d(n), it's going to go in front of an x. Then you will have plus or minus whatever the numerator number is. So if the numerator is positive, it's plus. If it's negative, it's minus. And you're actually going to have two parentheses that are just like that. So denominator with the x plus or minus the numerator. So these steps are all new to you. We're going to work one or two problems out together and then we'll go from there. So I'm looking at example 1 and I have x squared plus 9x plus 20. If you notice in front of the x squared, there's not a number there. And so when that happens, you have to imagine there's a 1. So I know that 1 is my a value, 9 is my b value, and 20 is my c value. So step 1 said we're going to take a and multiply it by c. So I'm going to do 1 times 20, which equals 20. So that's step 1. Step 2 now says that we're going to list out the factors of 20. So I need all the numbers that multiply together to give me 20. So I have 1 and 20, I have 2 and 10, I have 4 and 5, and then it repeats because it's 5 times 4. When that happens, you're done listing out your factors. This is where things get a little bit weird. So I need the two numbers to multiply to give me a positive 20, which means that both signs are going to be the exact same. Whenever this is positive, that means both signs stay the same. Now this middle term tells me that what my numbers signs are going to be. So this is positive, so that tells me that all my number signs should be positive. So I'm going to go ahead and write positives with all these factors. But I need the numbers to add up to that middle term of positive 9. So when I do that, I have 1 plus 20 gives me 21, so I'm not using that. 2 plus 10 gives me 12, so I'm not using that. 4 plus 5 does give me 9, so that tells me I'm using a positive 4 and a positive 5. Once you have found your factors, you're going to go ahead and write them over here. So I'm going to write a positive 4, a positive 5. My next step tells me I'm going to divide by that original a value. My a value, remember, was that 1. So I'm dividing both of these by 1. Now I need to simplify the fraction as far as I can. These can't be simplified any further, so we're going to keep going. So what I'm going to do is start out my parentheses. I'm going to have two sets of them, one for each fraction. So this first fraction, I take this bottom number, this 1, and it's going to go with an x. I'm going to do that for both of my parentheses, since both of the bottoms are 1. Now, this is where I add or subtract the top number. So when we look at the top number of the first fraction, it's a positive 4. So all I do is write it exactly like that. I write it plus 4. So that means the second parenthesis is a positive 5. So I just write it exactly like that as a positive 5. And this is your factored form of the original problem, x squared plus 9x plus 20. I'm going to do one more example so you can see a different type. We're still going to do the same thing here. I need to know my a and my c value. There is not an a value in front of the squared, but I know if there's not, it's a 1. I'm now going to take that 1 and multiply it by my c value at negative 8. So that tells me it is negative 8 here. And I'm going to list out the factors of first just 8. So I have 1 and 8, and then I have 2 and 4, and it repeats at 4, so I'm done. Now we want to look at this last sign like we did last time. This is not a positive, so this tells me that we are going to have different signs. One will be positive, one will be negative. The easy trick though is that this middle sign will tell you what the bigger factor has. So I know that my signs are going to be different. I know that the bigger number is going to have a negative. So I'm going to go look at my two sets of factors. 1 and 8, the bigger number is 8, so it has a negative. 2 and 4, the bigger number is 4, so it gets the negative. They have to add up to that middle part of B, so this -7. So when I do 1 minus 8, I get a -7, which is what we need. But I'm going to check the other one. When I do 2 minus 4, I get -2, so I am not using that one. I'm actually going to use this top one of +1 and -8. So I go ahead and I write out my two factors. I have the +1, the -8. And at this point, I divide them both by that a value. And my a value was 1. Now this left fraction here, 1 divided by 1, does simplify. But you need to always have a fraction, so we're going to leave it like that. Now I'm going to go and I'm going to start writing my parentheses. Remember, we have one parenthesis for one fraction, one for the other. These ones on the bottom are what go in front with an X. So I'm going to do it for both of them. Now I get to list out the rest of the fraction. So when you look here, this is a +1. So it's going to go in the first fraction as a +1. The second fraction has a -8 on it, so you're going to put it over here with a -8. And this is your factored form of the original problem. Now the second type of factoring we have is when the a value isn't 1, when it's a number bigger than 1. Your steps are still going to stay the same, so I am going to write those out, and then we'll do two examples together. So like I said, your examples or your steps are still the exact same. Multiply a and c, list out those factors, decide what we're adding and subtracting to get the middle term b. We're then going to take each factor divided by a and simplify the fraction, and then we're going to write it out in the two parentheses. These ones are going to give you larger numbers, so you may have to use your calculator to find out all the factors. So when I look at this first problem, I have 5x squared plus 21x plus 4. So I look here and I see that my a is 5, my b is 21, and my c is 4. So I'm still going to follow the same steps. I'm taking my a value of 5 and multiplying it by my c value of 4, and that gives me 20. I'm then going to list out all the factors of 20, 1 and 20, 2 and 10, and 4 and 5. Now, I told you a trick on the last one to look at the very last sign. This is positive, so that tells me that the signs of my factors are both going to be the same. And then this middle term tells me what the bigger number is going to have, and it tells me my bigger number is going to be positive, so I'm going to mark that. And since I know my signs are all going to be the same, that means all of my signs are positives. When I go and do +1 plus 20, that gives me 21, which is what I need because I need that middle term of 21. I do 2 plus 10, that gives me 12, so I won't be using that. And the last one is 4 plus 5, which is 9, so I won't be using that. I'm going to go ahead and write out my factors. So I have a +1 and I have a +20. Remember, we take this and we divide it by that a value, what we talked about in the very beginning, that 5. So I'm going to divide both of these by 5. Now my first fraction is still +1 over 5 because that does not simplify any. But my second fraction, 20 divided by 5, I can divide both of those by 5. And when I do, I get a +4 over 1. Because what I did was I did 20 divided by 5 to give me 4, and 5 divided by 5 to give me 1. Your fractions are all the way simplified, so we're going to go ahead and write out our parentheses. We still have 1 for each fraction. Those bottom numbers, so this 5 here and this 1 here, we're going to go ahead and write those in the beginning of our parentheses. So 5 and 1, and with each of those, we're going to stick an X. Now the last thing we do is we look at those top numbers with their signs. This first one is a +1, so I'm going to write a +1 in the first parenthesis. The second one is a +4, so I'm going to write that in the second parenthesis. Sorry, I said second first, but first. And then I have my factored form of 5x plus 1 times x plus 4. And this is your factored form. You're done. I am going to skip example 2, and I'm going to do example 3 because it is different than the first one, but we're still going to follow the same steps. My a value here is 4. My c value here is -3. So when I multiply 4 times a -3, that gives me a -12. So when I start listing out the factors of 12, I get 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4, and then of course it repeats at 4, so I don't list out anymore. Now is when we have to look at the signs of the original problem. So this minus sign right here tells you that we are going to have different signs. One is going to be positive, one is going to be negative. And then this middle term here tells you that the bigger number is going to be positive. So I'm going to go look at all my factors. I have 1 and 12. 12 is bigger, so it's positive, which means that 1 is negative. 2 and 6. 6 is bigger, so that gets a positive. 2 gets a negative. And then 3 and 4. 4 is bigger, so 3 gets a negative. Now, I still want my factors to add up to that middle term of positive 11. So when I do negative 1 plus 12, that does give me 11, so we'll check the others. Negative 2 plus 6 gives me 4, so I'm not going to be using that one. And finally, negative 3 plus 4 gives me 1, so I'm not going to be using that one. I found out that my factors will be negative 1 and positive 12. So I am going to go ahead and list them out here. I have negative 1. I have positive 12. Now I take them and I divide them by the original A value, which was 4. This first fraction, negative 1 over 4, does not simplify, so we're just going to rewrite it, negative 1 over 4. But my second fraction is 12 over 4, and I can divide both of those by 4. When I take 12 divided by 4, that gives me a positive 3 over 4 divided by 4 gives me a 1. I have two fractions, so again, I will have two sets of parentheses. We're going to take those blue numbers, or the numbers on bottom, and they're going to go in the front of each parenthesis. So I'm going to have 4 in the front of the first one, and 1 in the front of the second. And with each of those, I'm going to put an X. Now, the last thing to do is to take these numbers on top with their signs and put them in the parentheses as well. So I have 4x, I have a minus 1 here. I have 1x, and I have a plus 3 in the second one, and that's how you factor these ones.